Would you let your children watch a movie about hundreds of killing creatures, terrorizing a small town, and wreaking havoc? In 2025, the answer is no, or so I hope. But in the mid 80s, it was a whole different story, and we need to dive into that. So today, on Why You Should Watch or Rewatch, let's talk about Gremlins. Gremlins the movie is as old as I am. I've been fond of this movie ever since I was a kid, even though I didn't get to watch the movie until I was like 8 or 9 years old. But I had toys. This movie existed for me even before I watched it, because when it was released in 1984, I was a few months old only. But the toys were there, the toys were alive, and I remember quite fondly I had an action figure of Gizmo on my nightstand for as long as I can remember. If you are older than me, Gremlins existed way before the movie released in 1984. There were, for example, the World War II campaign where we were warning people about Gremlins. There was also the Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner before Star Trek fame, where a gremlin hijacks a plane. You saw the parody on The Simpsons, even though you didn't saw the Twilight Zone episode I'm talking about. So Gremlins existed before the movie. Toys existed for kids in the 80s before the movie, but how that became a thing? How a horror movie became a Christmas movie for the family in the 1980s? It is an important distinction here because at the core, Gremlins was and probably still is an horror movie. Chris Columbus wrote the movie as an horror script, passing it around Hollywood to make a name for himself on specs and maybe become something bigger. Steven Spielberg picked it up and asked to clean the movie so it was ready to go for the whole family. So, horror movie became a Spielberg project. Spielberg, of course, for E.T. and a lot of family projects in the 1980s. And to make this alive, we asked Joe Dante, a horror aficionado, to make the movie. So we have this whole mishmash of styles that became the Christmas classic that is Gremlins today. A reason to go back and watch Gremlins is obviously Joe Dante's work. Joe Dante, before Gremlins, was relatively unknown. He directed Piranha, a Jaw spoof that was riding the wave of scary monsters in the sea, and a comedy horror, The Howling, that you probably forgot about, but was kind of a big deal in the 1980s. So when Joe Dante came into the Gremlins project, he was straight up to horror movies, and he injected this into the movie, into the script, but with a lot of wacky humor, because Joe Dante, after that, made a lot of dark comedies and even family flicks. He made The Burbs with Tom Hanks. He made a Looney Tunes movies, Small Soldiers in the 1990s that we all watched and didn't understand how a violent war movie. He's all over the place. And in Gremlins, you have everything Joe Dante can do. Horror, comedy, social commentary. And it's the main reason to revisit the movie is to realize how deep it is. It goes way beyond how cute Gizmo is and how interesting the Mogwais are. It is a very, very deep social commentary on the American society in the 1980s and everything that goes around it. 40 plus years later, this critique of American consumerism is still very relevant. Why? Because we are living the fears from the past. There was a fear of technology, the fear of buying too much, of corporation becoming too big, of greed being the downfall of humanity. Of course, we can subtract all of the fear of Orient that is very present in this movie. Asia in particular is kind of the enemy, with Vietnam veteran being afraid of Asian people, the menace of the Gremlins coming from Asia straight up. So that part of the movie didn't age that well, but everything else, we as a society, we as buyer, we as consumer are the problem. Gremlins are not the problem. They are the objectification of the problem. We are deep down the problem, and this is what Chris Columbus put in the script, and Joe Dante just exploded it on the screen with many, many, many instances of havoc and mayhem, even murder in the movie. So it's not for the family, it's not for the faint of heart, and even though it's a little bit too much on the nose, like the message is not subtle at all, it is still very relevant. And when you rewatch Gremlins today as an adult, with clear expectations, mind you, you understand where they were going with this and what they wanted to do. The only part you don't get is why was this marketed for children in the 1980s? That's the thing I still don't understand. Even though Gremlins was a part of my childhood, this is not a movie for children. This is not supposed to be a movie for children, but we had toys, cereals, comics, cartoons, everything Gremlins in between the movie and the second one in 1990. It was very much alive for the kids because back then we were selling everything to kids, even the Toxic Avenger, the trauma exploitation movie from the end of the 1980s became a cartoon, even though the movie is super gore, exploitative, and not really recommended today. It aged very poorly, but it's just an example as how we operated in the 1980s, and it fits the movie because the movie critiques how we turn everything into Gift's idea and we will overbuy and overproduce, thus destroying the very essence of the thing. So the Mogwais, when they are given to our characters, come with warnings, 3 steps to respect for everything to remain balanced. Of course, it takes like 10 minutes into the movie and everything is out of order, but the previous owner of Gizmo respected the rules and everything was peaceful. Like I said, the message is very much on the nose, but still very much accurate today. We are the problem, and Gremlins is the mirror that just shows us why we are the problem. That is why rewatching or watching Gremlins in 2025 is more important than ever. It's a lesson in American history. This movie was created in a bubble, in a small town bubble. Everything feels created to serve the movie, like the houses are painted a certain way, all the Christmas lights and everything looks fake, but in a good way. It looks fake like a Hallmark card. It's a picture, a moment in time where the Gremlins can act as a warning and as a fable and as a story as well that still holds up today because the time is not important. It's the how, the why, the message is important. And every year I still think about Gremlins. Every time I scroll my streaming services and I see Gremlins, I'm like, hey, I should rewatch Gremlins, and I did this week before I did this video, and almost every year I have the Blu-ray at home, I have the streaming services as well. Gremlins is a part of my life 40 years after, and we will get another movie in 2027, Gremlins 3. The last one came in 1990, so this movie is still alive in the memory of people. Gizmo is very much alive. Gizmo was copied, imitated, spoofed. We had toys after that, the Furbies. That's straight up Gizmo. Baby Yoda in the Star Wars universe. Come on, that's straight up Gizmo. It's the same thing. It's the small puppet you carry around. That's super cute. Same playbook. It still works today, and it's incredible to see where it all comes from. That's why going back to Gremlins is essential. You need to know where this come from, and you need to enjoy where this come from because the sequel was fun, was bonkers. It was a more entertaining movie, but the first one is deep. The first one means something, and the first one is the perfect storm of Chris Columbus, Joe Dante, and Steven Spielberg, young, hungry, ready to change the world, putting it all in a movie, and we get to see it again and again and again. I just love this. Also, on a more technical side, this was before CGI. 1984, you had to use puppets, slow motion, practical effect, and forced perspective, and a lot of tricks from the 1970s to create the Gremlins. And when you see 100 Gremlins on the screen, it was a headache to create, and for me, it adds to the magic. It adds to the power of the movie. You go back to this and you appreciate how you needed to be super creative to do this. It helps the storytelling. It forces you to make choice in your storytelling that fits the restriction you have. Restrictions are good for creativity. I'm not saying CGI killed all movies, but it makes for a more easy experience for filmmakers. And sometimes when it's easy, it's not as good because it's complacent. But that's a topic for a whole other day. It's probably because I'm in my 40s, but props to puppeteers. Everything stop motion, like the whole style of making movie for me is way better, and diving back into Gremlins is a great way to see how to master this. And Gizmo is cute because you feel like you can hold him in your hand. Gizmo is not a CGI practical thing. He existed, and that's why the action figures right after the movie came out, they were Gizmo. You could own Gizmo even though he was a plastic instead of fur, but nevertheless, practical effect always wins, and Gremlins is a great movie for that. So voila! Those were a few reasons why you should watch or rewatch Gremlins in 2025. Keep it away from your kids unless you really want to introduce violence to them. I would suggest to wait until they're like 10 or 11. I watched it way too young. I'm not saying it changed my perspective on the world, but I should have seen it way later in my life. The murder scenes are kind of weird, and you don't want that for your kids, obviously, but you want to rewatch this. And if you rewatch it and you go back to it, don't forget the rules, the obvious rules, so that the Gremlins don't destroy the world. Don't get them wet, avoid direct lighting, and don't feed after midnight. You could also apply this to your life. If you eat past midnight when you are in your 40s, your next day is ruined. So that's it for me. That's it for Gremlins. And I'll see you for the next movie that you should watch or rewatch. Ciao.